They said no ship could survive what was coming. Not the storms. Not the kamikazes. Not the torpedoes tearing across the black Pacific night. But then there was USS Iowa, a 45,000-ton steel beast that didn't just enter the war. It changed it. Imagine the scene. Japanese pilots diving from the clouds, screaming toward a single target, this monstrous battleship that refused to die. Explosions ripped across her decks. Fire rolled through her corridors. Metal twisted, alarms screamed, and the ocean shook under the force of the attack. Yet through the chaos, the Iowa did what no enemy believed possible. She stood her ground. Every blast only made her angrier. Every attack only proved one thing. This wasn't just a battleship. It was a monster forged to survive the impossible. And Japan was about to learn why. For decades, naval historians have argued about which warship truly ruled the oceans of World War II. But among the giants of steel and fire, one name rises above the rest: USS Iowa, the battleship the enemy feared, respected, and could never destroy. She wasn't just another vessel in the U.S. fleet, she was the Navy's pride, a symbol of American engineering pushed to its absolute limits. Fast, ruthless, and unbelievably resilient, Iowa was built at a time when the world was burning. Japan's Imperial Navy dominated the Pacific with some of the deadliest warships ever designed. The United States needed something stronger, something that could outrun cruisers, outgun destroyers, and survive attacks that would obliterate lesser ships. USS Iowa became that answer. This video takes you deep inside her story, from her birth in American shipyards to the terrifying battles where Japan tried, again and again, to sink her. You'll witness the raw courage of the men who served aboard her, the engineering miracles that kept her alive, and the moments when she stood alone against the storm. Welcome to the legend of the battleship Japan couldn't kill. When the Pacific War erupted in 1941, the world's oceans transformed into vast killing grounds. Japan's Imperial Navy, disciplined, experienced, and armed with some of the most advanced warships of their time, swept across the Pacific with terrifying speed. Their carriers crushed Pearl Harbor. Their cruisers dominated the seas. Their battleships, including the Yamato-class monsters, represented unmatched naval power. America was fighting against a force that had spent decades preparing for this very moment. The Pacific became a chessboard of massive distances, unpredictable weather, and brutal engagements where a single lucky hit could decide the fate of thousands. The United States needed a new kind of warship. Not just big. Not just powerful. But fast, capable of outrunning anything that could challenge it, and deadly, capable of overwhelming any enemy foolish enough to stand in its way. More importantly, it had to be survivable, able to take punishment that would tear lesser ships apart. American naval doctrine was shifting rapidly. Aircraft carriers were becoming the new kings of the ocean, but carriers were fragile and needed protection. Without a guardian, something massive, armored, and unstoppable, they were easy prey for Japanese bombers and submarines. Thus emerged the idea of a new battleship class, one that could escort carriers, strike with overwhelming force, and survive the most vicious attacks the Pacific could unleash. From this vision came the Iowa class, a series of battleships unlike anything the United States had ever built. And leading them was the first of her kind, USS Iowa, BB-61. Even before she touched the water, rumors began to spread. Intelligence reports reached Japan describing an American battleship so fast it could chase cruisers and so heavily armed it could level entire shorelines. Japanese naval commanders dismissed it as American exaggeration, until they saw the truth. Launched in 1942 and commissioned in 1943, Iowa was more than a war machine, she was a turning point. The Pacific was shifting. Battles now spanned thousands of miles. Air power ruled the skies. Technology evolved almost monthly. The United States needed ships capable of adapting to this chaotic battlefield. USS Iowa was built for exactly that. She wasn't designed to merely survive the war. She was built to dominate it. Long before USS Iowa fired her first shot in anger, she was already a marvel, a masterpiece of American naval engineering born from urgency, fear, and ambition. As the Pacific burned, the U.S. Navy demanded a warship that could do the impossible, outrun threats, outgun enemies, and outlast the deadliest weapons Japan could unleash. What they created was nothing short of a steel titan. The Iowa-class battleships were a new breed. At a glance, Iowa looked like any other battleship, sleek, long, and imposing, but beneath her dark gray armor lived a monster. She stretched 887 feet, longer than 3 football fields, and displaced more than 45,000 tons. But it wasn't her size that terrified Japan, it was her speed. Most battleships of the era lumbered through the ocean at 21 to 24 knots. Iowa could reach 33 knots, faster than many cruisers. She could chase down enemies that believed themselves safe, and escape threats that would doom other ships. Japanese commanders were stunned, they had never imagined a battleship could move like this. Iowa didn't slice through the water, she roared across it. And then there were her guns. The heart of her strength lay in her 9.16-inch/50 caliber Mark 7 guns, each capable of firing a 2,700-pound armor-piercing shell over 23 miles. One shell could obliterate a bunker, punch through enemy armor, or vaporize anything unfortunate enough to be near its impact. The thunder of her main battery shook the ocean itself. Sailors aboard Iowa described the recoil as if the entire ship rose from the sea, angry and alive. But she was more than firepower. Iowa was wrapped in a protective shell of 12.1-inch belt armor, angled to deflect torpedoes and enemy shells. Her decks were layered with steel thick enough to withstand direct hits. Japanese intelligence often underestimated American armor technology, assuming U.S. ships were lighter and less protected. Iowa proved them wrong. Her armor scheme was so advanced that even the mighty Yamato's shells had to land perfectly to penetrate her defenses. And yet, the engineers added more. The lessons of Pearl Harbor had taught the U.S. Navy a painful truth: aircraft were the new predators of the sea. So Iowa bristled with anti-aircraft weapons, 20mm Oerlikons, 40mm Bofors, and 5-inch dual-purpose guns that could turn the sky into a lethal storm of steel. By late war, Iowa looked like a floating fortress, with guns pointing in every direction. Inside her hull, thousands of sailors lived and worked in a world of steel corridors, engine heat, sweat, and constant readiness. For massive engines, capable of generating 212,000 horsepower, drove her through the sea with the fury of a machine made for war. To her crew, Iowa wasn't just a battleship. She was a beast. A guardian. A symbol of American power at its peak. And soon, she would prove just how unmatched she truly was. When USS Iowa finally left the safety of American waters and sailed toward the Pacific, she carried not only the hopes of a nation but the weight of expectation. The Navy had invested millions, engineers had worked around the clock, and sailors had trained to exhaustion. Now it was time to see if this steel giant could truly live up to her legend. Her first major assignment came in early 1944, when Iowa joined the Fast Carrier Task Force, the most powerful naval strike group ever assembled. The carriers, Essex, Bunker Hill, Intrepid, and others, were America's sword. Iowa was their shield. Her mission was simple: protect the carriers at all costs. In reality, it was anything but simple. The Japanese were desperate. Their pilots patrolled the skies relentlessly, hunting the American fleet like wolves. Their submarines prowled the ocean depths, waiting for the slightest mistake. The Pacific was enormous, yet somehow always too small to hide in. On her very first combat operations, Iowa met the enemy. Japanese bombers appeared suddenly on the horizon, dark specks growing larger by the second. Sirens wailed across Iowa's decks. Sailors ran to their stations. The air thickened with tension. And then Iowa unleashed her fury. Her 5-inch guns roared to life, sending explosive shells skyward in perfect rhythm. Her 40mm Bofors barked in rapid fire, filling the sky with streaks of burning tracers. The calm blue Pacific transformed into chaos. Witnesses aboard the task force said Iowa's anti-aircraft fire looked like a wall of metal climbing into the sky. One pilot, who survived the attack, later described the sight as flying into a hurricane made of steel. Bombers fell from the air. Explosions lit the clouds. Iowa's gunners shouted coordinates, adjusted angles, and fired again and again. Not one bomber reached the carriers. Not one broke through Iowa's shield. But the Pacific had more tests waiting. In another operation, Iowa escorted carriers launching strikes against the Marshall Islands, a network of Japanese airfields and strongholds. She endured constant alerts, sleepless nights, and the gnawing uncertainty of what threats hid beyond the horizon. Yet through it all, Iowa proved something that would soon terrify Japan. She wasn't just strong. She wasn't just fast. She was reliable, terrifyingly reliable. Every mission hardened her crew. Every attack sharpened her instincts. The Pacific was awakening, and the USS Iowa was rising with it, ready for the moment when Japan would finally throw everything it had at her. And that moment was coming, much sooner than anyone expected. The attack came in the late months of 1944, when the Pacific War reached a level of desperation Japan had never imagined. American forces were advancing island by island, and every victory tightened the noose around the empire. With resources running out and ships sinking faster than they could be replaced, Japan unleashed its most terrifying weapon, kamikaze pilots, men willing to trade their lives in a single explosive strike. USS Iowa was deep in the Philippine Sea when the alarms screamed across her decks. General quarters. General quarters. The sky was clear one moment, and filled with death the next. Dozens of Japanese aircraft emerged from the sun, diving steeply toward the American fleet. Iowa's radar crackled with warnings. Her officers shouted orders. Sailors sprinted to their positions, their hearts pounding against their ribs. This was it. Japan wasn't coming to fight. Japan was coming to kill. The first kamikaze broke formation, diving straight toward Iowa's starboard side. The pilot aimed for the forward turrets. One direct hit could cripple the giant. Iowa's AA guns erupted instantly. The 40mm Bofors lit the sky with fiery lines, while the 20mm cannons hammered relentlessly. But the kamikaze kept coming. Faster. Lower. Closer. At the last second, less than 200 yards from impact, one of Iowa's 5-inch shells exploded directly beneath the aircraft. The plane shattered into burning fragments, scattering across the waves. The crew barely had time to breathe before the next attack came. A second kamikaze streaked in low over the water, using the sun's glare as cover. Iowa turned sharply, her engine screaming as the helmsman fought to present a narrower target. The ship tilted, spray exploding off her bow, but the maneuver saved her. The kamikaze overshot, skimming so close to the deck that some sailors swore they felt the heat of the plane's engine. He crashed into the sea, missing by mere feet. But the deadliest threat was still on its way. High above the fleet, a Japanese dive bomber began its descent, this one carrying a massive 500 kilograms bomb. If it hit Iowa's deck, the explosion would rip through steel and ignite her ammunition stores. The crew looked up in horror as the plane screamed downward. Iowa's guns fired everything they had. The air shook. Tracers filled the sky. The bomber kept falling. 2,000 feet. 1,500. 1,000. Then, in a moment that became legend aboard the ship, Iowa's forward 5-inch battery scored a perfect hit. The plane exploded mid-air, the bomb disintegrating before it could reach the deck. Flaming debris rained harmlessly into the ocean. The attack lasted nearly an hour. When it was over, the sea was littered with burning wreckage. Dozens of kamikazes had launched their final strike. None had sunk the Iowa. None had even touched her. And across the Pacific, Japanese commanders realized something terrifying. If this battleship couldn't be destroyed by sacrifice, what could destroy her at all? Japan's failure to sink the USS Iowa was not luck, though luck certainly played a part. It was a combination of engineering brilliance, disciplined crew performance, and a design philosophy that anticipated the evolving realities of modern naval warfare. When the smoke cleared and the kamikaze attacks ended, naval analysts on both sides reached a sobering conclusion: Iowa wasn't just a tough ship, she was built to survive the impossible. The first reason Japan failed was Iowa's armor system, which represented a new generation of American battleship construction. Her belt armor didn't rely on thickness alone, it relied on angles, a sophisticated geometric protection scheme that deflected enemy fire rather than absorbing it directly. Even a heavy armor-piercing shell had to hit at the perfect angle to penetrate her defenses, and in the chaos of battle, perfection is rare. Then there was her speed. Most battleships were slow-moving giants, easy to predict and easier to hit. Iowa, however, could outrun cruisers and reposition faster than Japanese pilots could adjust their attack paths. Speed wasn't just about giving chase, it was a form of armor. A moving target is harder to hit, especially when that target can turn sharply, accelerate suddenly, and disrupt the attack pattern of kamikaze pilots trained for predictable trajectories. But perhaps Iowa's greatest strength was her crew. These men trained relentlessly. Every drill was performed as if lives depended on it, because they did. Iowa's gunners could calculate lead angles, distance, and timing so quickly that they turned anti-aircraft fire into an art form. Radar operators worked with surgical precision. Damage control teams stood ready at all hours, prepared to seal compartments, pump flooding, extinguish fires, and restore power within seconds. Their discipline meant Iowa never faced disaster unprepared. Japan also underestimated America's ability to integrate technology into warfare. Iowa's advanced radar-guided fire control systems allowed her to track and engage enemy aircraft long before they came into visual range. Where Japanese ships relied heavily on human eyesight, Iowa relied on electronic vision, a decisive advantage. Finally, there was the psychological factor. Each failed attack chipped away at Japanese morale. Pilots watched their comrades dive bravely toward the steel giant, only to vanish in explosions that left Iowa untouched. Rumors spread that she was cursed, protected, or simply unkillable. In truth, she was none of those things. She was the product of design, discipline, and determination. And Japan had no answer for her. By the end of World War II, USS Iowa had become more than a battleship, she had become a symbol. A symbol of American resilience, engineering brilliance, and the unbreakable spirit of the men who fought aboard her. But her story didn't end with Japan's surrender. In many ways, Iowa's greatest legacy began after the war. When other battleships were retired, scrapped, or forgotten, Iowa remained indispensable. She was called to serve again during the Korean War, where her mighty 16-inch guns rained devastation upon enemy positions. Marines on the ground described her firepower as thunder from the sea, a terrifying roar that signaled hope for American troops and doom for their enemies. Decades passed, navies evolved, and missiles began to replace big guns, yet Iowa refused to fade into history. In the 1980s, she was modernized under the Reagan administration. New technologies, new radar systems, and even Tomahawk cruise missiles transformed her into a hybrid war machine, part battleship, part missile platform. Few ships in history have served across such dramatically different eras. To sailors, Iowa was not just steel and rivets. She was alive, a guardian that carried generations of Americans into danger and brought them home again. Many veterans spoke of her with a kind of reverence, recalling the humming of her engines, the deafening blast of her main guns, and the unshakable confidence she inspired. In 1990, Iowa was finally retired for the last time. But unlike the forgotten wrecks that rust beneath the Pacific, she earned a peaceful fate. Today, she rests with honor as a museum ship in Los Angeles, visited by thousands who walk her decks and feel the echoes of history beneath their feet. Her legacy lives on not because she fought, but because she survived. Because she endured everything her enemies threw at her, and remained standing. USS Iowa is not merely a battleship. She is a monument. To power, to courage, and to a time when giants ruled the seas. As the sun sets over the Pacific today, its golden light reflects off a silent giant, a ship that once shook the oceans with its thunder. USS Iowa no longer charges into battle, no longer faces kamikazes or storms of steel. But her story continues to echo across time. She stands as a reminder of a generation that refused to break, of sailors who fought not for glory, but for each other. A reminder that strength is not measured by how many enemies fall, but by how many times you rise when the world tries to bring you down. Japan threw everything it had at the Iowa. Fire, steel, sacrifice, yet the battleship endured. And in her survival, she became something more than a weapon. She became a legend. A monument to courage. A testament to resilience. A monster the enemy could never kill.